Okay, fine. Great. Oh, 10 seconds left. That's fine. You know what? I'm gonna stick with it for now. Fab. Wow. Yeah, let me get my. Wonderful.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm just going to give everyone a few seconds to join. And any previous sessions they are attending, and we'll go ahead and get started. 2
seconds. Jason, I apologize. This might be my end, but I think I've lost your audio. Are you still able to hear me? Okay.
I am able to hear you. Can you hear me?
You've come back crystal clear. There we go. Apologies. Were you just introducing me?
Perfect. Let's go ahead and get this session started. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Billow. I'm a customer success manager here at Blackbaud. Really excited to have you all join this BB Dev Days session with the wonderful and great Tom Hedges today. I'm going to pass it over to him, but I will be available in the questions and checking out those to make sure that we address all of them. Just a quick heads up, this session will be recorded, so you'll be able to access this once we've uploaded that to the platform. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Tom. Thank you so much for doing this.
Jason, my pleasure. Thank you so much. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's session. Be part of the solution, how to test if your website is accessible and what to do if it isn't. So before we begin, I should just say a few words about the accessibility of this presentation itself. The text that you can see on screen at the moment is pretty representative of the text size I'll be using in this presentation. And this is the volume I'm planning to speak at the whole time, so do feel free to adjust your volume accordingly. If you want to use captioning, we should be being live captioned by AI, which hopefully can understand my British English accent. As I say, I'm a British English speaker, but I will try to use language which is clear for all English speakers. And before I go any further, I should probably pause and introduce myself. Hello, my name is Tom Hedges. I'm a senior software engineer with Blackbaud. Specifically, I work on the Just Giving peer-to-peer fundraising platform. And in particular, I work on the checkout and payments flow within the Just Giving product. I'm based here in the UK, in the city of Brighton, on the south coast of England. And as part of my role, I'm studying for a Web Accessibility Specialist certification by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. Away from work, I like to give a little something back to my community by serving as a trainee navigator aboard a lifeboat. So myself and my fellow crew members can be called away at unexpected hours of the day and night to go out to sea and try and support those who may be in distress on the water. Fortunately, I am booked off for the next 40 minutes or so we shouldn't have any interruptions to our evening. Now, our agenda for this session. We're going to start with an introduction to some key terminology. Then I'll take a little look, in fact, a demo of some browser plugins that might help you with testing. Then we'll talk about navigating a website with only a keyboard, have a brief introduction to screen readers, and then we'll look at 3 of the more common accessibility issues that might well be present in websites you manage, and we'll look at some easy ways to identify those issues and how to solve them without too much technical know-how. Then we'll move on to talking a little bit about organizational culture, how you can be a bit more accessible by design, and the importance of testing with a diverse group of users. Then we'll take a little look at how Blackbaud is improving the accessibility of our own products before wrapping up with some next steps that you can think about taking in the next few days, weeks, and months. And finally, a few minutes of Q&A, hopefully. Just to warn you all, I am working off a single screen for this session, so I actually can't see any comments. So I'm going to rely on Jason to jump in if there's anything critically important. But don't worry, we will come back to any questions at the end if we've missed them on our way through. Okay, so the first thing I want to cover in terms of terminology that really underpins all of certainly this presentation, my approach to accessibility, and the whole of the modern accessibility movement, arguably. And that's the social model of disability. So this is the idea that people are disabled by barriers in society and not by their personal impairment or difference. And when I talk about barriers in society there, I'm talking about our individual and organisational attitudes, the environment that we create, be that physical, digital, and also the business processes and key ways of working that we follow or don't follow. So essentially, we create a disabling environment through those choices that we make. If you're aware that there is an accessibility issue in your environment and you fail to act, that is a choice. Similarly, choosing to remain willfully ignorant of accessibility issues that may exist in your environment, that's also a choice. So thank you all for choosing to join this session and avoiding the path of ignorance. I should also say that all language used in this presentation is meant with respect. The disabled community is wide and diverse, and different members of that community would choose to use different language to refer to themselves and others. All the language I've chosen is certainly meant with respect. So this presentation is only going to touch on the very merest surface of a very broad topic of accessibility. So please don't be surprised if you have more questions and answers at the end of today. I'm certainly not aiming to answer every possible accessibility question there might be, but I will try and answer all the ones you throw at me. So first up, some key terminology. Accessibility can be abbreviated to ALI, A11Y. That's an example of a numeronym where the 11 letters between the A and the Y of accessibility have been shrunk down to just the number 11. So you might see that with a capital A or a lowercase a, and as I say, it's usually pronounced ALI. Next up, WCAG or WCAG, that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So these are a set of standards that have been developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, on which many countries have then based their own national digital accessibility law. So the latest version of the WCAG guidelines, 2.2, was released at the end of 2023, and that has 86 success criteria, sort of individual tests or rules, if you like, that a digital system should adhere to, conform to. And those are grouped into sort of 13 umbrella guidelines that all support the 4 key principles of digital accessibility: perceivable, operability, understandability, and robustness. Now, when WCAG is referenced, you'll typically see it referenced by its abbreviation, specifying a version number, so 2.0, 2.1, or the latest 2.2, and also a rating, single A being a lower level of accessibility, through AA and then up to AAA standard, where there's a really high level of accessibility to all aspects of a product. So you'll commonly see that abbreviated, for example, here as WCAG 2.2 AA, as being the standard that a particular website, product or service is aiming to meet. And that's the standard that we aim to meet at Just Giving. Now, moving on, the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. This is a US civil rights law protecting people from discrimination based on disability by any private or public organisation. So that's a very broad act, as I understand it. I'm certainly not an expert in American law, but crucially doesn't have a specific technical underpinning. So I think there's quite a lot of grey area, shall we say, in what ADA compliance actually looks like. By contrast, Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, that's a US federal law that requires federal agencies to use accessible ICT. And this is based on and is approximately equivalent to WCAG 2.0 AA. So there is a specific set of technical criteria underpinning that law, which platforms are required to adhere to if they're going to be used by federal agencies. Over here in Europe, we have a similar law, snappily titled EN 301549, the accessibility requirements for ICT products and services. So very similar to Section 508 in the US, but here in Europe, this is based on WCAG 2.1 AA. And the last bit of terminology we'll look at here, VPAT, or a Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. So this is a standard template document for recording whether a particular product or website or part of a website conforms to every aspect or success criteria within a particular one of those standards that we've just been discussing, whether that's a particular version of WCAG or Section 508 or EN 301549. And once that template detailing success or failure against each of those criteria has been completed, the completed document is sometimes referred to an Accessibility Conformance Report, or ACR. Okay, that's enough background. Let's take a little look at some browser extensions that might help with your accessibility testing. We're going to look at 3 today, Wave, Axe, and Lighthouse. This explains the peculiar title of this slide if you have been wondering from the agenda. So before I demo these 3, I should just say there are many, many more browser plugins and tools to help improve or evaluate the level of accessibility of a website. I'd really just suggest trying a few, taking some recommendations, see what works well for you. And a couple of public safety announcements. First of all, please do be wary when installing any new software, particularly if it's not from a trusted vendor or supplier, and do make sure you comply with your employer's ICT rules about installing browser extensions. A second, more general consideration is that these kind of automated or semi-automated tools are not a full replacement for slightly more long-winded human-powered manual testing. These are a really useful way of kind of flagging up some issues, but it's not the same as thorough testing by a human being. As with so many things, a computer or some automated process can take you quite a chunk of the way, but you really do need some manual work to really make sure you've covered all the bases. Okay, let's go and do a little demo. I've listed 2 websites here that are really useful for showing a sort of before and after of bad accessibility practice and good accessibility practice. So I'm going to use the top one of those just to demo these 3 plugins. Let me switch over to my browser here. Fantastic. So the first plugin that I'm going to look at is Wave. I'm here in the Chrome browser just because that's the browser that I tend to use day to day as a software engineer in my work. And once you install the Wave plugin, you get a little button to turn it on here in the top right hand corner. Lovely stuff. So when I turn Wave on, it's going to give me the sort of Wave panel down the left hand side of the screen, and it's going to overlay the page then with lots of little icons. I actually find that a little bit overwhelming when it puts them all on at once. So I usually start by just kind of turning all of them off and then just switching on the ones that I want to investigate. So I'm going to narrow this down to, so it's saying it's found 16 errors and then 4 contrast errors. So let's call that 20 errors altogether. And I've focused in on the missing alternative text. So if I hover over one of those logos, it's giving me a little red dotted line showing me this image doesn't have any alternate text. So that means if this image didn't load, there'd be no explanation of what was supposed to be there. And for users of, say, screen readers, so that's commonly people who are blind or have low vision, they wouldn't get any explanation at all of what this image represented. So I've got some shortcuts there to open up the code, if that's going to help me or an engineer I'm working with to identify exactly where in the code we need to make a change to supply that alternative text to an image. Equally, I can click on this lovely reference button, and that's going to give us a nice, friendly, human readable explanation of what this error is and why it matters to users. So that's a very quick introduction to Wave. Let me just turn that back off again. Next up, I'm going to take a look at a tool called the Axe DevTools. So Axe is a product made by DQ, who are a consultancy and training provider and sort of thought leader really in the digital accessibility space. They provide some really fantastic resources, and this Chrome browser plugin lets you do a full accessibility scan of a page for free, or you can pay to upgrade for some custom features. So I'm going to do a quick full page scan. Lovely stuff. So that's run nice and quickly, and this has found 50 issues that it wants to alert me to, and it's classified them by how serious they are. Again, I can hone in on this images must have alternate text and choose to highlight, and again it's going to pop a nice purple box around one of the images where it's found an issue and give me a little bit more explanation about it. I'd say this is a slightly more technical tool. It's perhaps a little bit less friendly to maybe non-developers, non-web engineers, but it's a very valuable tool for finding issues. And the final tool that I want to take a look at is Lighthouse. So this is a Google product that's built into the Chrome browser, and this enables you to generate a report that covers topics, including accessibility, but also things like performance, best practice, search engine optimization. Its full navigation mode is a really nice detailed report. Takes a little bit longer to run, probably only 90 seconds or so, but that's 90 seconds I don't have right now. So I'm going to generate a nice quick snapshot report, and I'll have a quick think about this website. Great, and now it's going to alert us to a number of issues that it's identified, and again, those familiar images without alt attributes. So I've picked on that particular example because it's a nice straightforward issue that all of these tools identified, but you may have noticed the number of errors each tool has identified has been different. Again, they all work in slightly different ways. They're looking at the code using different techniques. So it sort of underscores the value partly of using multiple tools, but also of not relying solely on a tool, but falling back on genuine human manual testing and experience to know whether there's an issue with your site. Okay, great. So if I jump back to our presentation, let's move on to keyboard-only usage. So this is vital for many users of digital technology who have limited mobility. They may, for instance, have a tremor that means they're unable to easily or consistently use a pointing device or a mouse, but they may be perfectly able to use a traditional keyboard, the same as we all have attached to our laptops. So it's really important that websites be accessible and usable by keyboard-only users, partly because it serves those users who can use a traditional keyboard, but also because there are many alternative input devices. So these aren't a keyboard or a mouse. They may be tracking, say, the user's eyeball movement to determine what action the user wants to take, or there may be a smaller number of buttons or switches that a user is able to interact with, but far short of the many dozens on a traditional keyboard. And all of these alternative input devices work by mimicking keyboard input to the computer. So essentially, if you can work your website using just a traditional keyboard, it's probably also accessible to all of those users of alternative input devices as well. So in short, it should be possible to use every aspect of your site without touching your mouse. And that's quite a good challenge we can have a go at now. So I'm going to run a quick demo using the BBC website. That's the British Broadcasting Corporation, our state broadcaster here in the UK. And my challenge is I want to go and check the latest tennis news using only my keyboard. So I'm going to pull up my on-screen keyboard just so that you can see what buttons I'm pressing, and then I'm going to jump into my web browser. Okay, I'm going to cheat slightly and choose the BBC homepage using my mouse. Great. Now I'm on the BBC homepage. I can start tabbing through the content, I get that nice firm black outline on the BBC logo there that tells me where what element on the page is in focus, so I know what I'm interacting with as I move around. And there we are. As I've tabbed, the first thing that's come up is a previously hidden button to skip to content. So that's an example of what's commonly called a skip link. And that just allows me as a user who's navigating with the keyboard, rather than having to sort of tab through all of those sort of main navigation options that we can see at the top of the screen. This is just going to do exactly what it says on the tin, and it's going to skip past all of that to the main content of the page. So if I was to hit enter on my keyboard, skip to the main content, the next time I tab, I'm looking at the top election headline about the upcoming general election here in the UK. Now, if I tab backwards, just to give you a sense of how many keystrokes I've saved, we can see I'm navigating backwards through the menu, got that nice firm black outline so I know what I'm interacting with. There we go, and I'm back to the skipped content link. So all of those keystrokes were saved by having that skipped content link, and I definitely recommend that you should add those to any site that you're working on. And now my challenge was to look for tennis news. So I can see a nice clear sport link in the middle of that navigation menu. So let's head through to that, hit enter on my keyboard. Great, we've navigated to a new page. I can see a couple of tennis headlines, but I'd like to get all of them. So I'm just going to run through this menu all the way to tennis. Great, hit enter on my keyboard. There we go. I can now get all of the tennis headlines and scroll up and down the page using the mouse keys to see everything that I want to see, or tab into a particular story and open it up. Fantastic. There we go. That was a very quick introduction to the world of keyboard usage. And as I say, just really vital that every part of your site be usable without touching that mouse. We'll touch in a moment when we talk about screen reader usage. We'll think about some of the reasons why a site might not be navigable unless you're using a mouse. Okay, so on to screen readers. Now these are pieces of software that, as the name suggests, are just going to read whatever's on screen, and particularly whatever element has focus at that moment in time. And these are crucial for users who are blind or have low vision, so they're not able to see most or all of the content on screen. So they rely on the computer reading content and menus, links, headings, everything being read to them. As well as those users who rely fully on that technology, there are also users who simply prefer to have content read to them. That may be members of the neurodiverse community who are better able to absorb or understand information when it's read to them rather than if they read it off a screen. Equally, it could be somebody who is not able to look at a screen because they're currently driving, or they're in a very bright environment that their screen's struggling with. So they simply need to have content read to them instead. Now, all Apple devices are shipped with a screen reader called VoiceOver, which pairs very well with the Apple default browser of Safari. So that's the example we're going to be having a look at in a moment. If you're a user of a Windows computer, typically, unfortunately, you have to buy a screen reader as an additional software product. Now, screen readers are especially reliant on what we call semantic code. And put simply, that means that the HTML that's used for an element should match the purpose of that element. So, for example, the main heading of a website should be an H1 element. A button on your website should use the button element. And that's simply because those attributes, those HTML elements, are going to give some extra content, extra context to the screen reader to pass on to the user, so they're better able to navigate the site that's in front of them. Okay, let's talk about that a little bit more with a demo. So I'm going to head back to the BBC in Safari this time, and my challenge is to get a weather forecast for noon tomorrow for my hometown here of Brighton in the UK. So first things first, I'm going to turn on
voiceover on, speech off.
I'm going to turn on voiceover, and then I'm going to jump through to Safari. Now I've cheated here slightly with voiceover in that I've turned the spoken voice off, just because that would create some friction with me trying to talk to you at the same time. So in this big grey box on the bottom half of the screen, we're seeing all of the text output that's voiceover typically would be reading aloud to the user. And what I'm now going to try and do is get a weather forecast purely on the basis of that text information that I'm receiving. Right, so let me just, there we go. Lovely, so I'm now going to be navigating purely using my keyboard in this scenario. Perhaps I'm a user who has very low vision, so I'm unable to see the screen clearly and use a mouse, so I'm relying on my screen reader output. So the first element that I can tab to is a link. So I'm getting some extra context that this is a link to the BBC homepage. It's part of a navigation menu, and I've previously visited this link. Great, lots of extra information there. Again, if I tab again, I get that skipped contents link that we've talked about already. And obviously I could kind of navigate through menus one item at a time. And if it was the first time I'd encountered the site, that might be the easiest thing for me to do to get a full sense of what's available to me. But screen readers typically have some shortcuts built into them, so I can pull up a list, for example, of all of the links on a page, and I could navigate up and down this list. So some of these we've already seen, and I could go, okay, there's a link for news, a link for sport, there's a link for weather. That's what I'm looking for. Great. If I hit enter, it's going to jump me straight to that link, and I can hit enter again to interact with it. Okay, so now that I've reloaded a new page, again, I could use the tab key to get through to that skip link that could jump me to the main content, or I could use another shortcut that's built into VoiceOver. Rather than the list of links this time, I'm going to head to the list of headings. So again, whether this is an H1 tag or an H2 tag is going to give me a lot of extra context for the screen reader user. So I want to search for a location. So I've just scrolled through a list of headings and I found search for a location. Well, that sounds right to me. So if I hit enter on my keyboard, it's jumped me straight to that point in the page. Okay, so let's go and see what the next input for our screen reader is. Okay, I've got the word search. That doesn't mean an awful lot to me. Okay, now I'm being told I've got a list box pop-up, menu pop-up combo box. Well, that sounds like something I can interact with, so let me drill into that. You're probably getting a sense here that there's almost a kind of maybe a different set of norms and conventions in some ways for screen reader users. I'm not a native screen reader user, but if typically people who are native screen reader users will navigate much faster than this because they're very used to those sort of conventions of how screen readers work, and some of the clues that they get from the context about what sort of elements they're interacting with. So I can enter the name of a town. Okay, lovely. So the screen reader is now telling me a list has expanded. So let me go and have a look at that list. Great, I can see a previously visited link to Brighton and Hove, the name of our twin city, but it's part of a list of 8 items, so I could navigate through the rest of those links if I was looking for a different Brighton, but the first Brighton that came up is the one I wanted, so I'm going to navigate back to that, hit enter on my keyboard, a new page loads. Wonderful. This time I'm going to choose to use the skip link to jump me to the content. I've got that H1 element telling me This is the page for Brighton at the start of the main content of the page. So I'm just going to keep navigating. Now I'm encountering some context here. Heading level 2, forecast for Brighton. Heading level 3, day-by-day forecast. So this is text which isn't visually apparent on the screen, because a user who's able to see the screen kind of already has that context for what they're looking at. But the screen reader user needs that extra bit of context because they aren't able to sort of see so many elements at once. So this is a good example of visually hidden text that plays a really valuable role for a user of the screen reader. Okay, so I'm going to keep navigating through. What do I find? Okay, I've got a link to today's weather. Next up, a link to tomorrow's weather. Fantastic. Let me interact with that link. Now, we've got a weakness here of the BBC website because I've just interacted with that link. Visually, we can see that the weather forecast for tomorrow has loaded, but actually there was no update to the screen reader user. There was nothing in the output there to tell me tomorrow's weather has loaded. So arguably that's a weakness of this particular implementation. So for the moment, I'm just going to keep navigating through. Again, I could be looking at some of those lists of links or headings to see if that would help me. But okay, eventually I get to something telling me there's an hour-by-hour forecast. And okay, I've got an hour-by-hour forecast for Thursday, the 6th of June. If I navigate through 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m., 12 noon. Fantastic. There we go. I can see a brief summary of the weather forecast. At the end of that, we can see more details. And this is a collapsed button. So that makes me think this is a button. I can interact with it. It's probably going to uncollapse something. And that's probably more details about the weather. So if I hit enter to interact, I get that more detailed version of the weather forecast for noon tomorrow. Okay, I think that's quite enough of me working my way slowly through a page with VoiceOver. So let me just turn VoiceOver off for a second.
VoiceOver off.
So there we go. We've seen examples of a few things there. So that, excuse me, that semantic code, that use of button elements so that the screen reader user knows that the text there being read is part of a button that they can click on, interact with, the use of heading elements and the level of heading elements, so I can tell what's a sort of main heading versus a subheading. That semantic code, really, really important for screen reader users. And similarly for keyboard users, because there are, depending on how the code has been written for a website, you could, theoretically, you can turn anything on a website into a button, but it might be a button that only works if you click on it with a mouse or tap it with your finger on a mobile screen. It might not be possible to interact with it using a keyboard. So again, by trying to overthink things, we can sometimes make a website accidentally inaccessible. So always worth running through these tests to see whether there's any major issues with the site that you manage. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the most common issues and how we can solve them. As I say, worth remembering, simpler is often better with HTML. It is a kind of inherently accessible language that's been in existence for quite a long time. And when we try and get too clever with it, that's when issues sometimes come up. Okay, so images with missing or inaccurate alternative text. So that was the issue we encountered when I was demoing those browser plugins. So any image or IMG element should have an alternate or alternative attribute, just abbreviated to alt for simplicity. And for a purely decorative image, for example, an image maybe that's used as a bullet point, or a horizontal divider or vertical divider in your page, those purely decorative images, a user of a screen reader doesn't really need to know about those. So if you add an alt tag that is just empty text, then that will be completely ignored by a screen reader. If that alt tag was missing, then many screen readers might just read the source, so the file name of that image, which could be quite jarring for a user. And similarly, what you might find with many website content management systems, they may default to setting the file name to be the alt text. So you do need to, when you've uploaded a new image, you need to go and make sure that alt attribute is either empty or is a nice detailed but also fairly concise explanation of what that image shows. So in the second example here, a young man with a frustrated expression cradles a baby in his right arm and holds his smartphone in his left hand. Now, I'm sure we're all picturing slightly different mental images, but we're probably all picturing what I've just described to you. And from that, given the rest of the context that might be on the page, we might be able to work out that this is someone who maybe is frustrated that they're trying to use their phone one-handed and perhaps can't do something because they're effectively disabled by the digital environment they're trying to work in with only one hand. Now, a special mention of images which contain text. For example, an image of a poster. Generally speaking, you want to avoid having images that contain text on a website. This creates kind of a number of issues, on different device sizes. As that image gets smaller or larger, the text could become unreadably small, or if it's enlarged, it could become, kind of quite blurry and hard to read for some users. So if possible, it's better to position text elements over the kind of background color or image of that poster instead. So that simply then means that for screen reader users or those navigating with a keyboard, it's going to be much simpler for them to access all of that text content without having to study an image. If an image must contain text, perhaps you don't have the original, you only have the version that has text in it, then that text must also be in the alt attribute if it's important to the context of the image. And sort of whether an image contains text or if you've overlaid text elements over an image, it's really important to test how that looks at a variety of different screen sizes and orientations to make sure, for example, that you haven't ended up with dark text over a very dark bit of the image, meaning that text is unreadable, where those colors are too similar to be able to read. We described that as an issue with the contrast ratio. So the ratio between sort of relative brightness of the text and say that the color or the image behind it. If that number gets too small, then it's just very difficult for a human to read. And within the WCAG standards, there are sort of specific numeric values that you need to maintain in that contrast ratio. Again, you might find sort of certain combinations of your brand colors. If you put one on top of the other, the text becomes difficult to read, whether you have any sort of visual impairment or not. So very important to do those contrast ratio tests. Okay, next up we have missing captions and transcripts. This is very nice and straightforward. All video and audio content should have captions and or transcripts to accompany them. Those can be open captions that are sort of permanently part of the video, or they can be closed captions, similar to the ones being used for this presentation, that the user can turn on or off as they wish. And those captions and transcripts should also reference things like sound effects, anything else sort of other than dialogue, essentially, that's important to conveying the sort of the full subtleties and nuances of the audio that the user may not be experiencing. And it's worth saying there are different WCAG criteria here, depending on whether this media contains audio, for instance, podcast, a silent video, or whether it's a kind of combined audio and video, as with most YouTube videos, and also whether this content is being delivered live or whether it's pre-recorded. So yeah, there's some complexities in the criteria there. And it's worth remembering this benefits obviously those with a hearing or visual impairment who may have no option but to sort of read the written version of some audio. But also people who are maybe in a very loud environment where they can't hear the audio and they just need to read a transcript or see live captioning, or equally if they're in a very quiet environment, if you're in a library and you've forgotten your headphones but you want to watch that all important YouTube video, you really need to have some captions on there so you know what's going on. Okay, the third topic that I'm going to cover here quickly is click here links that are confusing. So link text should clearly indicate the nature of the content to which it links. So as an example, instead of saying, if you want to know more about volunteering, click here, with only the words click here functioning as a link, then it would be better to use a phrase such as find out more about volunteering and make that whole phrase the link to the content about volunteering. That's partly or significantly going to benefit those screen reader users who can pull up that list of all of the links on the page, and if they just get a list of click here, click here, click here, click here, that doesn't help them very much. Useful for a link to sort of contain its full context, if that makes sense. And it's also worth saying that all links from page A to page B should have matching text. So, for example, if you've got two links on a particular page on your website to your volunteering hub, let's say, you should use the same text for both of those links rather than using different text, such as find out more about volunteering and volunteer with us today. That can create confusion for all users, particularly those using screen readers and particularly members of the neurodiverse community. So let's put away specific examples and just think broadly about organizational culture and being accessible by design. Now, I've talked about a few issues that you can sort of identify and resolve late in the day, if you like, things you could study and improve on an existing website. But fundamentally, accessibility shouldn't ever be an add-on or an afterthought or an accident. I often like to think that the output of any given process is often reflective of the culture of its production. So, much better for an organisation to think about accessibility, in every stage of a project, for it to be a kind of a daily concern rather than something that is just hurriedly tried to be bolted on at the end. Thinking about accessibility early benefits everyone and costs less. So we would always encourage you to shift it to the left in your planning process. Start moving it as early as you can. Also worth remembering that impairments can be temporary or situational as well as permanent. We've mentioned a couple of those already today. For example, a parent holding a child maybe now only has access to one hand, or a user of a smartphone in very bright sunlight may really struggle to get adequate contrast ratio when trying to read text on the screen. It's worth thinking of yourself whenever you're working on any of these projects as temporarily unimpaired, whether that's because throughout the day there's going to be lots of situations in which you're impaired by holding a child or being in bright sunlight, but equally throughout our life we're likely to go through periods, particularly in later years, where we're probably going to experience some level of impairment, whether that's to our mobility, our vision, our hearing. So do think of yourself as temporarily unimpaired. And it's also worth looking up the inclusive design approach, which I've very roughly summarized elements of there, but it's a really deep and thorough explanation of how and why you can build inclusivity into every aspect of design. So Moving on to ask, don't tell. So the value of getting a diverse group of users to help you with testing. Whenever you carry out user testing, make sure you've got users with a variety of access needs. Do act on and respond to all of their feedback. And crucially, make sure that you're focusing your testing and your changes on those most important use cases, your homepage, your user registration, your checkout flow, whatever that might be for your site. And I've covered this already a little bit today, but if you're not a native user of this assistive technology, you using it for testing is good. You'll probably find some issues, but much better to ask someone who is a daily user of these technologies to give you their input and thoughts on what you need to do better. So thinking about doing better, what's Blackbaud doing? Well, our Sky UX design system is designed, built and tested to be inclusive. The design system empowers you to deliver accessible experiences for all. That's a quote I lifted from their homepage, which I think really sums up their mission very well. Blackbaud has VPAT documents available for an increasing number of products, and each individual product has its own initiatives. For example, I'm a member of the Just Giving Accessibility Champions, a sort of cross-functional team from across the business made up of engineering, UX, customer support, compliance, and senior management, all those key stakeholders who are needed to really drive change in the accessibility of our product. A nice little case study here of when me and my team are deploying changes to the Just Giving checkout. We use a tool from Axe combined with a browser automation system called Playwright that literally tries to use the latest version of the checkout that we've just updated and will alert us to any issues that require manual testing, or if it finds a serious error, it gives us a big red cross and prevents us from releasing what could be a problematic error for our users. Blackbaud also invests in staff training, whether that's our own internal accessibility training that our UX team has developed, external training such as the DQ course that I'm taking at the moment, building towards certification. But also in more informal ways, we have teams and Slack channels dedicated to the accessibility, to sharing accessibility best practice and driving improvement in our products. Even the template for this document, when I started building it, our PowerPoint presentation template contains a little reminder about which colours we should combine in which ways to ensure that we're remaining accessible even in our presentations. So, the final slide, some steps you can take today, tomorrow, the next day, the next few months. Try out some of these accessibility plugins we've discussed. Try navigating your own site using just the keyboard, just a screen reader. Do plan user testing that involves users with a variety of access needs, and ask the team managing your website what experience and training they've got. Perhaps they're looking for some more kind of internal champions to raise the profile of accessibility within the business. They may really appreciate the question. Think about what level of conformance is appropriate for your organization to meet, for example, US Section 508, and then ensure that any contracts for third parties, your public-facing accessibility statement, and your internal business plans reflect that commitment and ambition to help you meet it. You can complete a VPAT for your products or your site or parts of your site, and you may not get the level of conformance you want first time around, but you can update that each 6 months or each year and see how your conformance hopefully improves towards where you want to get to, and really just start making positive changes, both technical and cultural. That really is it. Conscious we've just run over time. Apologies for that. I'm going to drop out of the screen share now and see if there are any questions waiting for me. Thank you all so much for your energy and attention here. So we've got a question in the chat about accessibility coming to our products. Altru being an example, it's used by museums and arts and cultural institutions in the US. It has web forms for membership purchases, donation pages, and more. Well, Jason, I can see you've very kindly said you're going to follow on that one.
Yep, I will reach out directly as well to make sure we provide a direct answer on any resources specific to that product, as well as you mentioned it being built into our Sky UX and the other accessibility resources in your slides. And then there is one other question, Tom, hopefully you could see it, from David, where it says, accessible doesn't mean usable. What are some tips to ensure what you make is usable by someone using the assistive tech?
That is that's a really good point. Yeah, accessible doesn't mean usable. They are different things. Top tips to make something usable. I mean, I suppose as I've touched on a couple of times, if you're not a native user of a particular assistive technology, you might kind of struggle through to slowly try and think you found a solution to make your product, your weather search app, usable. But you may have just managed to make it it's accessible, but it's not really comfortably usable. Really, the best way to find that out is to ask some native users of that particular accessible technology to test it. And that's a paid for service. Lots of organizations will offer you to get that user feedback. Get it early on, maybe with the current version of your system. Get some feedback, start making some incremental changes. Learn through feedback from users. I would say that's really crucial. And really, simpler is often better. It is when we overcomplicate things, trying to get clever with lots of custom JavaScript, that's when accessibility and usability issues can start to creep in.
Thank you.
My pleasure. I can see a comment from Jenny there. Thank you very much. I'm glad you found it a useful session, Jenny. Thank you for that comment. If there's any further questions, please do feel free to throw those into the chat. I'm conscious we've just hit time, but I'm sure you've all got further sessions to get to and the rest of your afternoon to enjoy. So I will say an enormous thank you all very much for coming. I hope you found it a useful session. Take care, and then good luck with improving the accessibility of all systems you work on. Thank you very much. Goodbye.